Coming up on This Week in Computer Hardware, Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 is the new flagship. Intel is not extreme. Nvidia's GTX 1650 Super. T-Mobile lights up 5G nationwide. Larry Page leaves Google. All that and so much more coming up next on Twitch.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 543, recorded on December 5th, 2019. Intel is not extreme. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by iFixit. If you're tired of dealing with the ball and chain charger on your laptop, switch the battery yourself. iFixit makes it easy to swap the battery out on your Mac or PC with their all-in-one battery fix kits. Just visit ifixit.com/twitch and you'll get $10 off your next $50 fix. And by Expressvpn. Protect your online privacy with one click. Yes, it's that easy. For 3 extra months free with a 1-year package, go to expressvpn.com/twitch. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twitch weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most delightful, most engaging. And today, well, we're going to try to do some quick reviews of what's going on in the desktop, mobile, console, and, well, anything else doing with hardware and you. We might even talk about the FCC for a moment. I'm Patrick Norton from somewhere in beautiful San Benito County, California, joined, as always, by the man, the myth, the red-headed legend. Sebastian,
I'm less of a myth than you are, Patrick, because I'm in the same place all the time. I'm not in some undisclosed location in California. I'm in an undisclosed location in southwestern Michigan in the United States.
Well, I'm in a county park in south of Hollister. Which was really interesting because it's like you have to pay a day fee to get in, and it's just, I have line of sight to an AT&T tower. I have this magnificent signal, and I had to fill out one of those envelopes, with put $3 in it. You write your license plate on it, except it's been raining for like a week here, so all the envelopes were soaked through. It was fascinating. I feel like this magnificent blend of high tech and low tech because the AT&T tower I'm looking at right now is a bunch of cell nodes attached to an actual full-on old school, I'm in a anti-M pump, windmill pump, water pump up on a hill. So it's like the creme de la creme of, I'm staring at it. Like I'm a mixture of the creme de la creme of 21st century technology and 19th century technology. In fact, if that's also a T-Mobile tower, I could be in the footprint of nationwide 5G, albeit 600 megahertz. We normally, don't talk a lot about CEO changes unless they're directly related to, say, a hardware company or somebody like AMD or Intel or Nvidia. But I thought we really needed to point out. This is a
hardware company. They're a hardware company.
They are a hardware company. There are a lot of companies, right? But Larry Page is stepping down as the CEO of Alphabet. Sundar Pichai is going to be leading both Alphabet and Google. And given that the entire mobile world was changed by Google's decision to, get all crazy with the Android, I thought it was worth pointing out that this very serious change had happened. Vox has a good article that basically says this isn't going to change Google because Larry Page has not been working on the Alphabet businesses for quite some time. But it's pretty exciting. The article we linked to, New York Times, Kara Swisher did a nice sort of opinion piece on where will Sundar Pichai take Google. This is an interesting this is a big change, right? Larry and Sergey were the founders. Larry stepping away. It's also crazy to realize that, these guys are 46. They essentially changed technology and the internet. They certainly changed the mobile world in a huge way. They still essentially control the company because they're on the board and they hold most of the actual voting shares in Google. And that, Kara Swisher points out, this is a 21-year-old company, and that's a career. And I'm kind of curious to see, like everybody else's, where this goes. But this is amazing to realize that Steve Jobs changed mobile devices by coming up with the first iPhone. Android was kind of like the response to the iOS, and it continues to change the way people compute and use the internet. And that's just one of the many zillions of things that Google has changed about technology and how people do things, using the online and the search and the mail and the AdSense and all of the data harvesting and about 11,000 other things. In any case, exciting, curious.
Yes.
And are you excited about
the goings-on of big companies and their boards and CEOs? And, if I had been a founder of a company like Google, which of course Alphabet was the larger company that resulted from Google, and now Google apparently resides within Alphabet. I don't fully understand this, but they made so many billions of dollars that I think they'll be just fine. And I would take retirement at like 46 to 48 years old. That'd be fine.
Yeah, I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, they'll be fine.
So
they could live your lifestyle, Patrick, and just travel the country in an RV. And just say, screw it,
They could do it at a very higher level. In fact, they could just buy houses every place they stop, cash.
Oh, that's messy. That's messy.
Indefinitely. Okay. And there's maintenance and all those other things. In any case, Qualcomm, the new flagship Snapdragon, big shock, came out before CES 2020. Also a big shock, as in not a shock at all. Snapdragon 865, no integrated 5G modem, which people are either like up in arms about or don't care about. And then there's going to be the Snapdragon 765 that has 5G built in. Are you excited about these? Do you care about these? Do you feel that your cell phone needs more power? Scotty?
No, but I think we talked about the iPhone 11, whatever it's called. Right. Pro and Pro Max and the iPhone 11, the new models that came out this year. And it was interesting because former editor-in-chief and founder of AnandTech, Anand Lalshimpi himself, he had actually made, I think, only his second public appearance since joining Apple a few years ago to talk about the changes they'd made to that SoC and what they'd done with the new Apple processor was to focus on just efficiency. Let's look at areas that didn't need a performance improvement and just work on lowering battery life, and then work on like only bursting up to higher clock speeds when we absolutely have to, and just refining it at this point. They're not worried about like more cores faster. It was the same configuration, just more optimized. And so to look at the 865, if we go over the specs, I'm sure we'll see architectural improvements from the latest ARM architecture, from the things that Qualcomm does, because they use a custom variant of an ARM core, an ARM Cortex core. And then they don't use the default graphics that are provided by ARM. They use their own. And Adreno graphics from Qualcomm have been the standard for a long time. They're absolutely the fastest. If you just run real gaming performance type tests, workloads on those GPUs, they're faster than anything else. So on the Android side. So it's harder to compare things directly because, of course, Apple has to use their own API, the Metal API, which makes it almost impossible to cross, benchmark these things as we could once do. But, the thing that's interesting to me about this, what's that?
Not that that's frustrating.
Oh, no, not at all. Not when we used to be able to do OpenGL, ES, whatever, and now it's it's Metal versus OpenGL. So anyway,
part of what's crazy about this, right, is so okay, they're claiming 25% boost in performance. 5G is mandatory, right? The modem, the 5G modem is not integrated. It's a separate chip. Qualcomm, quote, won't sell the 865 without one, writes Ron Amadeo over at Ars Technica. It's kind of, they're pushing it hard. And I was also laughing because the Spectra 480 image signal processor on the 865, the camera co-processor, they're talking about a bandwidth of 2 gigapixels per second, quote, allowing for cameras up to 200 megapixels, which nobody wants a 200 megapixel camera.
No,
but
you want things like HDR and low light mode to process faster. I don't understand why there would ever be a need. Of course, I might be sounding like Bill Gates here. No one will ever need more than 200 megapixels in a camera, but hey, I don't think they will. Honestly, the human eye is probably not going to evolve that much. A 20 megapixel camera is something that's still rare on a smartphone. Right. So.
And it's because I was just laughing at the whole idea of it's megapixels is still such a huge thing in marketing. Up to 200 megapixels, we can do all of the megapixels. But it also means in your 12, 15, 20 megapixel camera, it should be obscenely fast in processing that image. High speed captures 960 frames per second at 720, which is still insane. Also, pretty much the same thing as the previous generation. Graphics driver updates are now coming through the Play Store, which I think is a big deal, or at least a smart deal for Qualcomm to work out with Google. The digital driver's license scheme. Did you read up about that? The identity credential APIs that are coming to Android. I'll just lay that out there. You can Google that and research that if you want to. I just remember looking at that and thinking like, just what I need is for my entire identity to be wrapped up in my phone. That's just, I can't even process that. This ARM Cortex A77 cores, still running at 2.84 gigahertz, the Prime core, then 3 additional cores, 2.42 gigahertz, and then Cortex A55 doing background processing, clocked at 1.8 gigahertz.
It's kind of crazy to think like these configurations in smartphones would have been and this, we sound old talking about stuff like this, but just think about the late 1990s. If you were to say, we're going to have a processor with this many cores operating at over 2 gigahertz per second. This is back when processors were like 120 megahertz. And, the fastest processors in the world by the end of the 1990s were just getting to 1 gigahertz for the first time. And now it's, how many 1 gigahertz to 2 gigahertz processors do I have in my phone? I don't know. The throwaway low power cores are like 1.8, I guess. Who cares?
4 million.
Yeah. And I have a bunch of them. I've got all these extra cores that just do things like, check for new text messages with my screen off. And that's all they do. Or play music.
One of the things that I guess bothers me about this is Qualcomm's making a 5G modem mandatory with this, which means essentially all flagship Android devices, or the majority, or mini, anybody who's not making their own chip is going to be using or is going to be forced to put 5G in their flagship devices, which most people still are going to have access to. It's not going to do anything for battery life.
And it's still a separate chip. Remember, like this is that 5G modem that they introduced, and they have not integrated it into the 865. So it's still a separate chip, which, as you stated, it might incur an additional power draw. And of course, if these are flagship devices, they're probably also huge devices, and they'll have larger batteries, and it will be mitigated by that. But
you would hope they would have a larger battery, but we've often seen larger devices with really mediocre battery life because they're bound and determined to make them thinner. Not that I'm bitter about that.
Yeah. But, bigger, haven't we learned anything in this industry? Bigger screen plus thinner equals weaker construction.
Right.
And we've been mocking the iPhone 6 Plus, I think was the one where you could just bend it in your hands. And that's become something that gets featured in every one of those durability YouTube videos for every phone since. But hey, we can't have a millimeter thicker device. Although, that it looks like maybe some of the devices released recently, without naming names, have been a little bit thicker than their predecessors for good reason, but we won't have to go down that road again. MacBook Air 6 or MacBook Pro 16.
Oh man, let's switch gears a little bit, move in the PC direction. Nvidia GTX 1650 super launched last week. Is it faster than the 1650?
You'd better believe it. Here's the funny thing about it. We talked about the 1660 Super a while back.
Right.
And the 1660 Super, they literally just took a 1660, a GTX 1660, and they moved it from one memory speed to another memory speed. So they gave it a big memory bandwidth increase.
Bump.
And it produced tremendous results. It became, for a $10 premium, it became nearly all the way to a 1660 Ti. And it's literally just went from GDDR5 to GDDR6. Like fast GDDR6, but still. So here we have a different situation where the 1650, their budget card, their low cost card, used a different GPU. It was built. It was much more along the lines of the 1050 Ti, the GTX 1050 Ti, like last year's budget kind of 1080p gaming card. Mm-hmm. And the TU117 GPU was in this new GTX 1650. I get these numbers confused. 10, 20 series, back to 16 series, so it's non-RTX, so no ray tracing cores. But it only had 896 CUDA cores. That's pretty low, and it wasn't a whole lot faster than a 1050 Ti. It was a boring launch, honestly. It was like, yeah, we tested it. We had a launch day review, and it was, yeah, it's a little bit faster than last year's card at this price point. And it was $149. If it had been $100 or $120 card, it'd be a lot more interesting. But it wasn't. And this 1650 Super is launching at the same $10 premium that the 1660 Super was over the 1660. And this is just kind of their standard thing now, apparently, is add $10 and give you a whole lot more performance, because this moves not just to a higher CUDA core count. It's an entirely different core. It moves up to the TU116 core that's found in the 1660 and 1660 Ti. So now the 1650 Super is basically a cut down version of a 1660. And it has faster everything. Like it's a faster card. It has more CUDA cores, and it's clocked higher. And if it just makes perfect sense if you look at the specs as we're showing up on the screen right now. If you're watching the video, if you look at its like potential GPU performance, it goes from FP32 like 2.98 teraflops to 4.42 teraflops. It's almost all the way to a 1660. And it has fewer CUDA cores, so it's not going to be quite as good in games. And you're going to see that in any gaming benchmark chart, like the ones from PC Gamer here. You're going to see performance that's a lot higher than a 1650. Not quite as fast overall as an AMD card, the RX 590, but that card is positioned higher. So AMD's response to this could be to lower the price of the RX 590s that are still out there. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, we know they already made this announcement and OEMs already have the RX 5500. Right. We're still waiting for that sort of December availability of that RX 5500 card. So at some point, we will have the smaller Navi card, the latest graphics architecture from AMD, to compete in the 1080p gaming space. But right now, there isn't really an answer except for an older AMD product that might get discounted to respond to this. But in that $150-ish range, if you can find one of these cards for $159, its official starting price, it's a huge win for NVIDIA in the 1080p space, because you're going to get 1080p high gaming performance for $159, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's basically as fast as about a $200 card, maybe $220 card was last year. Only this year, it's been incremental. It's like the incremental year. 2019 was the year where we had these slight performance increases and graphics cards at every $10 price point.
Right.
And when AMD, like towards the middle of the year, when AMD launched Navi, we finally had a little bit more competition. NVIDIA kind of undercut their launch a little bit by launching the super cards to start with. The original super cards were the RTX 2060 Super and RTX 2070 Super, and it took the performance of the next card up in the chain and brought it down an entire price level, which for those higher end cards is like $100 and $200. So very aggressive on pricing. It's stirred up a lot of competition, and now we're seeing them slowly round out the bottom end. And I'm sure Nvidia thinks they're positioning themselves well enough to respond to whatever AMD has before the end of the year, and then we'll doubtless see more stuff early on next year. We haven't heard anything, but I would love to see AMD finally show us big Navi. Maybe they'll reserve that for CES, because they showed off the Radeon
CES
7.
Was really so much about gaming last year.
Yeah, it was.
There was a lot of the huge announcements at CES were video gaming, which was such a strange progression from where in the past it was such a big thing for consoles there.
Yeah, it's just the consoles weren't ready. But we'll see. I'm sure E3 will be all consoles all the time, though, of course.
Well,
in 2020.
We suspect. We'll talk about that later later on. Early next year. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by iFixit. We love iFixit because they help us keep our stuff running. Consoles, they can help you. Phones, they have helped me so many times. And hey, if you're tired of dealing with the sort of ball and chain charger on your laptop because your battery's trashed and you got like 15 minutes of battery life, so you go from outlet to outlets like some sad digital wraith, you need to replace the battery. You can do it yourself, and iFixit, they're going to make it easy for you to swap the battery out in your Mac or your PC with their all-in-one fix kits. If you haven't heard about these, the fix kits have everything you need. All the parts, the batteries, all the tools, and they're backed by an industry-leading warranty. You get the most helpful repair guides on the internet for free, whether you're fixing a screen or a motherboard. You don't have to buy anything from iFixit. They are always going to let you check the guides. You can decide whether or not I can do this, I can't do this. And it's crazy because iFixit, they're not just about phones and laptops. You get step-by-step instructions with amazing photos to do everything from game consoles, tablets, Kindle, iPads, Windows. If you're trying to figure out whether or not you can revive that aging Kindle, they can help you there. Mac and PC computers, cameras, they got almost all the major brands. Car, truck repair, everything from your battery to your sun visor, your brake pads, they actually have guides to walk you through it step by step, even appliances, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, clothing. iFixit can help you fix just about anything. Check out their all-in-one fix kits at iFixit.com/twitch, and you'll get $10 off your next $50 fix. That's iFixit.com/TWICH. We want to thank iFixit for the support of This Week in Computer Hardware and keeping so much out of landfills and keeping so many good things running. Thank you, iFixit. I like them. I do. Okay. Ryzen-powered mini PCs, a.k.a. AMD does Nook. Are these looking promising, or are these looking Where are you feeling about these?
The I'm not trying to downplay the excitement surrounding an AMD-powered Nook, because I've personally had people talking to me or asking me about AMD-powered mini PCs for like 6 years now. And it's something that I think a lot of people want, and traditionally, outside of the whole sort of mythical Gen 11 graphics from these 10th generation, like 10 nanometer parts from Intel that really haven't materialized like we hoped they would, they are the solution for a small, if you're extremely size constrained and you cannot implement a discrete GPU in your design, you have to rely on processor graphics or chipset graphics. And Ryzen APUs are really good. And unfortunately, this initiative, which is a great idea because they're creating an open platform, kind of like Intel did with the Nook to start with. Intel had the 5x5. This is the 4x4 initiative. So it's kind of in between an Intel Nook and a Raspberry Pi almost. It's a little bit smaller. But they have this sort of generic design and people can implement it. And they have a bunch of different Ryzen embedded processor options. But I put together a table of the different ones, just going through the site and looking at specs. And they're still using Vega graphics, although some of them have, more GPU shaders and higher clock speeds than others. Some of them have higher memory speed support than others. But these are still 14 nanometer parts. So it's less exciting than it would have been if we'd heard about this initiative and then, oh, by the way, here's the new Zen 2 core APU with Navi graphics. So that would have blown people away. We probably have to wait until the consoles launch for products with those to be available to buy. This is my guess, because we haven't heard anything to this point. You'd think they'd have released it at some point this year amidst all the Zen 2 fanfare. But what they had for us at E3 in the APU department was a 3000 series Ryzen processor with graphics, but once again, it was Zen Plus, so not Zen 2. It was still 14 nanometers, and it still had Vega graphics. So they're just a generation behind with the graphics in their APUs. So, or the products formerly known as APUs. So I look at this as, okay, this is a great building block for next year when the 4x4 initiative includes the latest architecture at 7 nanometers, because that's when I think this smaller form factor gets really interesting, because you have either the option of going lower power or be more aggressive with clocks and voltage within the same thermal envelope. And then we could have something that would be legitimately kind of a console replacement if you wanted it to be at 1080p gaming resolutions probably, or just an all-in-one thing that you could implement, kind of like a Raspberry Pi, but with more horsepower. And so drive larger displays or multiple displays. Right. A couple of these that I was looking at on the higher end, they supported up to 4 displays. A lot of these are being marketed towards the industrial sector. So some of the companies they named, you're probably less familiar with from the retail side of things, but industrial signage is useful. It's not exciting to me personally, but some of these were from companies I've heard of, and just like a silent PC running a really low power AMD APU is cool. But I am going to wait until we have the latest architecture before I'm like, okay, I'm ready to move, a smaller device over to one of these and, forego a discrete GPU or something like that.
Makes sense. It's
not exciting,
Core 9,
yeah, it makes sense.
What's the short take on the Core i9 10980XE, the Extreme Edition processor? I
can make this very short, Patrick.
Products.
I can make this very short, so people don't have to listen to me go on and on about yet another product. This launched. I won't get into the heat they took from certain reviewers online who very correctly pointed out that it was a little questionable what they did about changing the embargo time to prevent AMD Ryzen Threadripper results from being on the charts.
Oops.
Because they knew how it would position them. Beyond all that drama, if you just look at it for what it is, if you're familiar with the Intel Extreme Edition processors, they're the top of the line, most expensive consumer processor from Intel. This is traditionally a $1,000 to $2,000 product. That's just crazy. They've been doing the Extreme Edition since the Pentium 4 days, at least, and they were $1,000 back then. These are really, really expensive processors. And in the last 2 years, they've been $2,000 processors. So this processor, the 10980XE, is about $1,000. I've been seeing it listed for about $149 or $1,049. So the list price starts at $979 to $999. So it's about $1,000. It's the exact same core and thread configuration as last year's Extreme Edition. It has slightly higher clock speeds. And then it has very slightly higher memory support. Like, even though you could use XMP memory and clock it up higher before, it technically supports 2933 memory right out of the box instead of 2666. So that's an increase. And then there's the deep learning boost stuff that Intel was talking about before this launch. That's enabled on this. So for certain applications, you will see an increase depending on what you're doing. But overall, the increase you're going to see is simply a result of clock speeds, because the architecture is the same as last year's Extreme Edition. The core count, as I said, is the same, has the same amount of cache. It's the same processor. And it's the same processor. So it's the same processor as the 9980XE, which was the same processor as the 7980XE from 2017. So all they've done is increase the clock speeds like 100 or 200 megahertz every year. And the Turbo Boost Max goes up a little bit and a little bit. So I think this one actually maxes out at 4.8 gigahertz with excellent cooling. So you don't have to manually push it higher. But you could get a 7780XE, bump up the clocks a little bit with good cooling, and have pretty much the same thing if you just overclock the memory yourself. So for this highest end enthusiast level part, the increases just did not make sense. They did not justify that price tag. But guess what? The big story here wasn't the performance. The big story was the price tag. It's been chopped in half. So we're back to where we were a few years ago, where Extreme Edition processors were $1,000 instead of $2,000. So that $1,000 premium they were enjoying for a short time there is gone because they have so much competition at the high end now. High end desktop, which, whether it makes sense or not, is a discrete market segment. You have desktop, and even though you can go really high end with desktop, then you have high end desktop, which Intel calls HEDT, short for high end desktop, obviously. And then that has traditionally gone way, way above the pricing of desktop. But now you could argue that Intel's i9 9900K and KS parts are really kind of high-end desktop right there. They're very high clock speed, 8-core, 16-thread parts. But this thing, if you're just doing the kind of work that needs a higher core count, even if the clock speeds are a little bit lower per core, it's kind of a monster. Like, I've been very negative about it up to this point, but really forget about the fact that it's still Skylake X architecture, regardless of however it's been rebranded, regardless of the fact that it's still 14 nanometer, all that other stuff. It's still it's still an 18-core, 36-thread part. So it kind of makes sense at this price level. I would like to see it, $800, but still, if you can find one on this planet anywhere for their MSRP, which of course you're never going to do, you could theoretically buy an AMD Ryzen 9 3950X for $749, get close to the same clock speeds or a little bit lower, 4.7 gigahertz max, and then get 16 cores, 32 threads. Now, right now you can't buy either of these, at least in America, the last I knew, like looking last night, but the cheapest Ryzen 9 3950X you're going to buy is just to buy a pre-built system that has one. Go like price out an iBuyPower or a Dell system or something that allows you to put in one of these processors. And even with the ridiculous upcharge that you often are faced with when making upgrades,
it'll still be cheaper.
It'll still be cheaper. The cheapest one on eBay, which has literally become the only place I can find one of these, the 3950X, has gone up to an average of, I think, $1,200 now. That's just the average selling price if you look at completed listings. And they're being offered for up to $1,500. And that's just for the CPU. So it's rare. I think they made maybe a couple hundred of them. I might be exaggerating, but they sent very few out to media. A few outlets got them, and they've been almost impossible to find at retail. So,
well, maybe that'll change after the holiday shopping season. I mentioned earlier that, we all hope. We all hope. We've been sort of watching 5G sort of meander around and show up in more cities. T-Mobile lit. I mentioned it earlier. T-Mobile turned on 5G across their nationwide network this week. They're claiming it's covering approximately 200 million Americans. This is 600 megahertz spectrum. That's the stuff that will travel farther than 30 yards or 30 feet or 6 feet if you have the wrong person or bus between you and the microcell, but doesn't deliver the crazy speeds. And the part about that kept confusing me is that they've turned the network on, but the phones don't actually go on sale until Friday, with Samsung and OnePlus are the two primary phones launching on 5G phones launching on T-Mobile on Friday. I have not seen, as of last night, or I should say early this morning, I have not seen any changes to their plans, but I suspect if they are going to change their plans again, which I think all the networks try to do every 6 months to a year just to drive me insane, those will probably show up when the phones show up on Friday. We'll see how that goes. UBS and Formal How to Techno Solutions did a study, and this was cited in the Wall Street. I caught it up on Thurrott.com, that Huawei's Mate 30 has no American parts. In fact, Huawei says all of their 5G networking gear is, quote, now America free, unquote. So America the second largest handset manufacturer in the world is now buying absolutely no U.S. parts. So, yeah. Just wanted to give the latest mild updates on the Huawei scene. Switching gears a little bit. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware brought to you by Expressvpn. We've talked about this. You know about VPNs. It's a virtual private network. It keeps you, well, private and secure when you're online, especially if you're traveling a lot, you're nervous about that hotel network, that free Wi-Fi, and you should be. A VPN is something you should run. But I've talked about this before. It can make running ExpressVPN can take your TV watching to the next level because it'll give you access to movies and shows that are only available in other countries. Now, I've talked about this. My first VPN, I used it to geolocate myself into Canada. But the whole idea is that you use a VPN to pop yourself up in an IP address in, for example, Canada, so you can, for example, watch curling that is locked to that particular country. Maybe you want to binge on Doctor Who or Star Trek on the UK Netflix, right? You just fire up ExpressVPN, change your location to the UK, refresh Netflix, and you're in. Right? ExpressVPN hides your IP address, lets you control where you want sites to think you're located from, and you can do it from like 100 different countries. You want to add Japanese Netflix, boom, you can use ExpressVPN to do that. It'll work with Hulu, BBC, iPlayer, YouTube. There are hundreds of reasons to use a VPN, and there are hundreds of VPNs out there. But let me tell you something, ExpressVPN, it is ridiculously fast. You shouldn't see any buffering or lag. You can stream in HD, no problem. And it's going to work on all your devices, phones, media consoles, smart TVs. You can watch what you want on the go or on the big screen wherever you are. It's good stuff. Now, if you visit my special link right now, expressvpn.com/twitch, you can get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. Support the show, watch what you want, and protect yourself. ExpressVPN.com/twitch. And we want to thank ExpressVPN for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. Shahad emails, hello, I recently switched to a certain MVNO, which is something I always have trouble saying. It runs over T-Mobile. All cell companies have fairly bad cell quality here, but this is slightly worse than Verizon was. Do you think a T-Mobile cell spot, a mini tower over Wi-Fi would work? The Galaxy S7 doesn't have Wi-Fi or text calling. Yeah. So Shahad is referring to T-Mobile cell spot. It should certainly help your connectivity in your home, at least if you have the internet in your home. And if I'm reading it correctly, T-Mobile will give you one for free or loan you one for free. It'll handle 16 simultaneous users, or more accurately, 8 4G LTE users. You have to have a T-Mobile account. This is not going to help you outside your home, and that can be kind of challenging. I lived, oddly enough, in a block of San Francisco where Verizon would not sustain connectivity. And I ended up having to eat the cost of the contract on the phones to get out of the contract so I could switch to something that actually worked in my block, because despite the fact that Verizon had to call me back 3 times during the service call where I was trying to cancel the service, they still made me eat the cost of the contract, despite the fact that obviously Verizon didn't work on that block. It's frustrating. Another thing you can do is you can try cell phone boosters. If you're looking for outside your home, I've talked about mobile boosters for your car. WeBoost, which came out of Wilson Electronics. SureCall is another one. They make products we've had good luck with if you're dealing with cell signal issues. What's cool about something like a cell spot, one of those sort of household cell devices or mini towers, a friend of mine used to call them, is that you can have 0 cell signal, but you create a cell tower basically by plugging this device into your home or your home network. In the case of having a weak signal, that's where a device from WeBoost or SureCall or any of the other cell phone antenna boosters can help you out. I did one on Tech Thing maybe 6 months or a year ago from SureCall. It was really impressive to watch what happened in terms of boosting the signal. And this was actually in a relatively populated area with a relatively strong signal, but the increased signal gave me huge increases in data speed and helped me with some call quality issues. Although 4G is a lot better at sustaining calls without issues than previous generations of wireless technology. Probably won't go into it too far, but Microsoft is definitely, this is the rumor, sources say Microsoft is definitely planning a cheaper disc-free Xbox, aka Lockhart, that's going to go, it's going to launch with its Project Scarlet console. I was kind of curious about that one. The other thing that I thought was kind of curious and really interesting is we talked about the sort of low-power PC from the initiative from AMD earlier in the show. Jeremy Hellstrom did a nice connection to OnLogic's Carbon 700, which is the update to their passively cooled up to 8-core, 16-thread, ruggedized industrial PCs. So if you're obsessed with the idea of having a fairly powerful PC and not having any fans on it to be completely passively cooled, Phoronix has a great article on what's going on with Carbon, or OnLogic's Carbon 700, and it's it looks like a giant, it looks like a car amplifier, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, it's like all fins.
Yeah, all heat dissipation all the time. So good stuff. Is there anything you can tease that's coming up on PC Per this week?
No, I cannot. There may or may not be something coming that I can't talk about, but
oh my goodness.
Just for some random unrelated reason, I've been re-benchmarking a bunch of graphics cards on new graphics drivers. Huh. And I have yet to get a GTX 1650 Super review done because I was like picking new games and retesting stuff, and then a game update came down and I had to invalidate a bunch of results, which is always fun. Right. There may be some reason for this. I don't know. I can't say. I could be lying.
I suspect this is Sebastian's way of not saying that he is not having a new GPU launch, not happening in the not near future. This is me speaking, not Sebastian. Call off the attack lawyers. With that, ladies and gentlemen, if this is your first episode, this is This Week in Computer Hardware. We call it Twitch. You can find more episodes at the website, which is twit.tv/twitch. If you have a question for us, like Shahad did, do us a favor, email twitch, TWICH, at twit.tv. And if you want more Sebastian Peak, head to PC Per. If you want more of me, head over to AVXL, or just keep listening right here at This Week in Computer Hardware. Search for that on your favorite podcatcher, and you'll probably find us. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Sebastian Peak.
We'll catch you next week on Twitch.